Yeah, you remember the intro to the first one. I'm not going to reintroduce myself. By now you should know who I am. Yeah, in the first talk I said, yeah, I'll cover that in the second talk. I'll cover that in the second talk. So now it's time for me to cover that stuff. Again, the disclaimer, but I have another very important disclaimer from you. That's from my very, very good friend, Jochen Mater, who's a developer at Instana right now. And he once got quoted, a good developer is like a werewolf, afraid of silver bullets. So the first thing is, nothing in this talk is a silver bullet. Yeah? Make up your mind what makes sense for you, and toss away all the stuff that doesn't make sense to you, or that you can't use in your day-to-day work. Yeah? Be critical. Yeah? Don't look at domain-driven design or microservices as the single possible silver bullet that solves all the problems. They don't. Yeah? Microservices solve very specific problems. If you don't have those problems, be happy. Yeah? Actually, you don't want to have those problems, yeah? Because they are difficult. Yeah? A monolith is nothing bad. Yeah? Sometimes a good developed monolith is way better than a bunch of screwed together microservices. And the same applies in my eyes to domain-driven design. Domain-driven design is not an all or nothing approach. Yeah? It's a set of tools, yeah? With various tools in there. Okay, with various tools in there, yeah? If you want to just do event storming and domain storytelling or something like that, good for you, do that. Yeah? If you think the bounded context is a great idea, amazing. Yeah? If you think context maps don't help you, congratulate yourself to that insight. Yeah? It's absolutely okay. So this talk is about microservices and domain-driven design. I'll quote a couple of sentences from the microservices community and then show you how you could solve those things with domain-driven design. I think the first quote that we can easily guess is, model your microservices along business capabilities. I think everyone in this room will probably agree with me on that. Yeah? An entity service is probably not the best idea for a microservice. Too generic, and it'll leak a lot of business know-how to the clients. So one solution for that, for this thing in the domain-driven design community, is the strategic design. Mostly consisting around the idea of a bounded context and the context map with all of its patterns. I would like to start off with the bounded context. As I said in the introduction, in my eyes, we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for the bounded context. Yeah? The bounded context agrees that any sophisticated business problem, any sophisticated business domain consists of a bunch of bounded contexts. You can see that as a module. Yeah? You can see it as it contains a domain model. Yeah? Some parts of the literature say you can nest bounded contexts. Don't do that in practice. It makes things incredibly difficult. And the next sentence is, in my eyes, the most important sentence you will hear today in this talk. It's the boundary around the meaning of a model, of a business model. What does that mean? Basically, it's a, let's say, a decentralization of domain modeling. Yeah? What have we done, if we look back a little bit in history, what have we done in the last 20 years? We've centralized things. Yeah? All of the approaches around service-oriented architectures, and that's actually a funny thing. If you look at the literature of service-oriented architectures, you will realize, hey, there are a ton of great ideas in there. Yeah? There's nothing wrong about a service-oriented architecture. If you look at the way how those ideas got adopted in the real world, we realized that it was used for a means to drive centralizations in many organizations. Yeah, there's this one big customer service, this one big central customer behemoth. It has the central model of a customer. Yeah? Everyone needs to comply to that. Yeah? It was also driven by various vendors, who sold big yeah, chunky service-oriented architecture technology suites, yeah. And it was all about centralization. If we look at the drivers nowadays in the IT world, we see that many things are about decentralizing things. Yeah? If we look at cloud computing is nothing but a decentralization of operations. Yeah? Any team can go ahead, order a database, get it right away. Any team can go ahead, scale out or scale up a couple of compute resources or something like that. Yeah? We put a lot of power to the teams. Yeah? The same applies to DevOps. Yeah? It's a decentralization of operations. Any team should be able to operate their own software. If we think about Agile, it's a decentralization of project management and stuff like that, and so on and so forth. And one thing that I always say is, or what I see at many larger organizations, they invest a lot of money in some Agile, whatever delivery kind of platforms. Yeah? However you want to call them, and there's most of the time some PaaS platform like Cloud Foundry, OpenShift or something like that, then some Jenkins or whatever, GitLab CI for continuous delivery stuff, and maybe some repository like GitHub Enterprise or GitLab or something like that for this. So that solves, I would say, the independence, the decentralization part on the ops and the delivery thing. And I always say to them, if you stop there and don't think about your domain model, you end up with a car that looks like a Porsche, but it has 2 lawnmower motors in it. This thing drives, but I doubt that you will have a bit of fun with that. Yeah? You need to work on your domain model as well. You need to work that you enable this independence, yeah, on the domain model, on the modeling, yeah, in such an environment, so that everyone can leverage from it, yeah. And one of the tools for that is the bounded context. So the last time I've done this talk at a conference was at the Jack Saxony Day, and to be honest, I forgot to adjust my slides here. So this is the Jack Saxony Day slide deck. So if you let's imagine you go to the Jack Saxony Day, which is an amazing conference, by the way, in beautiful Dresden. Had a really good time there, and you register yourself. So that's you as a customer. I know you are all more beautiful than this guy on the slide, and we organize. We identify a couple of capabilities around that. The one is reservations. Yeah, folks sign up at the conference, they pay, yeah, with their credit card and so on. Then the event needs to be managed. Yeah, they need to know how many folks attend the conference, who are the popular speakers with popular topics, who are newbie speakers with a popular topic, who is a newbie speaker with an esoterical new topic, who eats meat, who's a vegan, who's a vegetarian, and so on. So that's all happening in the event management. And in the end, you know it from a couple of conferences, everyone gets a lanyard with a badge where your name is on. There's way too much advertising on them usually, and all this stuff. Yeah? Let's take a look at the customer model in those capabilities. On the one hand, the reservations model. Yeah, that's quite an easy one. My stepdaughter studies business IT in Berlin, and she has to work with the MIT innovator since the first course on UML. And if I go to her, hey, open the innovator and draw me a class diagram of a customer, model a customer. Something like that would probably come out of that. That's fair enough for that context. That's a decent kind of thing. Yeah? However, if I look at the event management part, yeah, the centralized world, yeah, let's say the lunch preferences, yeah, or the content preferences, yeah, you could argue, hey, that's a central thing of the customer. We need to hook that on the customer. Yeah, we need to know who is really keen on learning what, and so on and so forth. I have my doubts. I oversaw, hey, you have a flip chart. I'll draw you the perfect customer model on that flip chart back there. In my eyes, the perfect model for the flip chart, for the customer, yeah, in this context is this. It looks like that. That's the perfect customer. It's super. That's a second customer. That's a third customer. That's the perfect model for customers in that context. Yeah? I mean, show me one conference, yeah, that has some security standing at the buffet, yeah, that tells you, hey, you voted for the meat and you're now eating away the vegan stuff, yeah? I haven't seen that happening yet, yeah? Maybe sometimes, but I haven't seen that happening, yeah? No one cares, yeah, who that actually is, yeah? No one cares who personally is sitting on that chair. Hey, Benjamin, you're not allowed to sit there. You wanted to go to Uncle Bob, yeah? That's just a joke, yeah? It's irrelevant who is that. And another thing about that capability, let's talk a little bit about quality criteria, especially when we move to a microservices world. How consistent will this context ever be? Will it ever reach 100% consistency with the real life at the conference? No, it won't. Should that be consistent? I would say that should probably be consistent, yeah? Because we want to make sure that everyone has paid and everyone is registered correctly and so on, that the invoices have been sent and so on and so forth, yeah? So this is an approximation, yeah? This is a guess, a rough guess. Okay, we have roughly 20% vegans at the conference. Let's order a few more dishes more for them, yeah? We need to place Eric Evans in the biggest room. Michael can go into a smaller room than that. That's okay, yeah? That's good enough for that bounded context. And I always like to model my stuff for being good enough for the time being. Yeah, we can learn along later, maybe we're wrong, but most of the time good enough is a really good solution. And then we have the badges. Yeah? Let's take a look at it from a data perspective again. I once went to a conference. Yeah? We have the name, a job description, and a Twitter handle for the badges. Yeah? The centralized IT world will start to freak out when they see that. We have the name twice. That can't happen. Yeah? That's horrible. Yeah? Yeah? Don't repeat yourself. Yeah? And so on. The answer is, as so often, it depends, which is actually the best answer you can ever give out as a software architecture. It always depends. Yeah? So what could possibly go wrong? Let me tell you a story. Last year I went to a conference in Germany. Said, hey, my name is Michael Plöd, and I'm speaking at your conference. And they looked me up. We don't have your badge. I was like, yeah, well, there's the agenda. That's me. Yeah, I'm on in 2 hours, so everything is good. And they looked again. We don't find it. I was joking to them. Look at the letter B. And she was like, oh, okay. Oh, shit. I'll print you a new badge. And for the English speaking, yeah, if you add my last name is Plöd. Yeah, if you write that blöd, it translates to stupid. Yeah, that's my last name. And I was like, come on, give me the B one. I heard every joke about my last name already. Yeah, easy going. What happened? Out of the reservation system came an Excel sheet. Yeah, and they had a bunch of folks who were creating the badges with a bunch of Word templates. Yeah, they entered my name and autocorrect struck. Yeah, happens. Yeah. Again, the bounded context is the boundary around the meaning of a model. Yeah, if you look at a car, another example, if you look at a car, yeah, let's look outside, there's a bunch of cars. If you start the car, yeah, so we could have a business model, car.getMotor.start. Would that be a suitable model for the car in the context of personal driving? Yeah. I mean, unless you're driving a really old timer, yeah, where you open the engine room, that's the get motor, and you turn around on the engine like that, like you did with the old cars, then that would be a suitable model. I mean, if I look out there at most modern cars, they usually just have a button. Yeah, or you hit the brake pedal if you drive an electric car or something like that. You start the car, you don't start the motor. If you switch the context, let's say the mechatronic in the service center, she interacts with your car. The mechatronic has a totally different view of the car, the single components, yeah, with a total different way of interacting with that. That's a different context, and I think a one-size-fits-all model for that would be a really lousy compromise for both worlds. No one will be happy with that. I mean, would you want to drive a car with a lot of fine-grained instruments and levers and plugs and so on? No, unless you're like a tech freak in terms of cars. So one of the things, yeah, that we can bring to the table is don't repeat yourself, the DRI Principles. Over the last couple of years, this has been held very, very high. Reuse, 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 reuse is king. So inside of a bounded context, I kind of agree with that. Between bounded contexts, you may think about repeating yourself. So if you cut your microservices along bounded contexts, yeah, we come to the place, yeah, inside a microservice, I really don't want to repeat yourself, but between microservices, between microservices, you may want to think about repeating yourself. That's an option, and the bounded context would allow you to do that. It's a decentralized model, so to say. So another thing, a couple of my colleagues, yeah, they have published books about microservices and so on. And one thing that I'm always joking about towards them in an ironic manner is, hey, you microservice folks, can't you go ahead and write one article or one book that doesn't mention the bounded context and Conways Law within the first paragraphs? Yeah, like nearly everything is bound to that. Yeah. However, we should actually mind Conways Law, yeah, when we deal with the communication between microservices and teams that develop those microservices. Yeah. Conways Law says that organizations tend to implement or build software that talks to each other like the organizational units of that organization talk with each other. Yeah? Now, if we think about communication between contexts, and this slide is not in any domain-driven design book or something like that, that's not mentioned in any book, that's something that I have made up mostly for myself in order to be able to explain a couple of the following concepts in an easier, understandable way. So that's not official DDD stuff. If we look at communication between contexts, we have to look at it from a couple of perspectives. Yeah? And I think there are various flows going back and forth between those contexts when we talk about communication. The first one is the most obvious one. That's the call flow. Let's say you in the second row are the Schufa. Yeah, the Schufa is a big credit agency in Germany. If you open or apply for a credit card or a credit, your bank asks the Schufa, hey, is this guy over there credit worthy? See you. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And get well soon. Yeah, and so I, as a bank, call the web service of the Schufa. That's the call flow. That is a flow that we usually look at in many enterprise architecture kind of diagrams. Hey, this system is calling those services. This system provides those services, and those are their consumers. So I call you, give me the creditworthiness of him. Yeah? Call flow. You will find that in code. If you analyze a code base, you can easily find the call flow. The next kind of flow is something you also can find in flow, but which is less obvious, and it's not looked at so much, and that's the model flow. So you're still the Schufa, and you answer me in your model. Yeah, the model, the response model of the Schufa consists of a creditworthiness indicator, a set of known loans that someone has, some warning criteria, and some knockout criteria. For instance, was totally bankrupt 5 years ago, or something like that. Yeah, that's the model of the Schufa. So this model goes my way as the bank, and I need to deal with that model. Yeah, one thing is I translate it into something different, or another way is I just keep on working on that. That's the model flow, and that's not only on a response size, but also on the request size. The way that I request, that I make the request, is already in your model. Yeah, so that goes both ways. Yeah, but someone has to deal with the external model, and that's the model flow. Not too many enterprise architecture diagrams take that into account, but this is a very interesting flow in terms of the coupling between systems. Yeah? Imagine me being the scoring component. I totally conform to the model, and there's another component, yeah, that I'm talking to, and now I keep on talking with your model with them. The model propagates over there, and if we change something on the credit agency, sooner or later we will realize that you back there run into a problem because the model cascaded throughout the whole application landscape. That's the model flow. It can be a problem, and it's something we need to be aware of. The next two flows are something we don't find in code. A model flow is easily identifiable in code. The first one is the communication or the politics flow. Yeah? How are teams communicating with each other? Yeah? Who is playing politics? Who is making demands against whom? Hey, I need that from you. And if you don't deliver, I'll escalate. Yeah? Yeah, you know the game. Yeah? It happens. And it's hidden. Yeah? It's most of the time implicitly hidden and not explicitly documented, because most of the time those who play politics don't want that their politics are explicitly documented. Yeah? The last flow that we have is something that I call the influence flow. The influence flow is something that, let's say, I'm still the bank, you're still the Schufa. You make a decision, hey, in terms of our digitalization strategy, we now only offer the service from 9 to 5. After that, it's no longer available. That's an action on your side. It has an effect on me. I need to deal with that. If you are another system and you start throwing errors, and if you just change stuff without telling me, I need to deal with that. Yeah? So actions from one team have an impact on the other team. That's something like the influence flow. Yeah? If you introduce a new maintenance window, I need to cater with that. You can do that. Yeah? And this is something we need to keep in mind. And there is one thing in domain-driven design that addresses these things, and that's the context map. Yeah? The context map is something that is one of those chapters in the DDD books that are, yeah, I would say, have a certain conflict potential in terms of the interpretation of the patterns, how they are seen. Yeah? There is no other area in domain-driven design which has been as heavily discussed as the context map pattern within innoQ, for instance. Yeah, I had heated really heated, serious discussions about the interpretation of some of those patterns with a couple of colleagues. Yeah? Eric Evans started off with those 7 patterns. Von Vernon added another 2 to the list. Yeah? I will now start off in the next part with the 7 patterns from Evans, and then look at the Vernon patterns after that. In the end, context maps. If you look at the literature tells you they are suitable for existing system landscapes or for existing systems. To be honest, I disagree with the literature. I think it can be used on existing systems, but it can also be used, and that's the interesting part for the microservices, in order to think about a decentralized governance model. Yeah? Because one thing that I can easily derive from a context map, how is governance being lived, but I can also explicitly model the governance. Yeah? If your governance is a, I would say a free-for-all, or in Germany a Wünsch dir was, yeah? Kind of meeting, where everyone can say, hey, I want that, I want that, I want that, you will have many discussions. You will have a governance board which is really slow, which is swamped by politics, and which is totally ineffective. It won't work. Yeah? So, but you can make a clear decision. He can make claims against him, but he just has to take what he gets. Yeah? He's not so important in that matter. That's not going to be very popular, but it will go a long way if you really want an efficient governance model. Another thing is you can explicitly document politics being played. I'll give you a couple of examples on that later on. You can show how bad models propagate through systems, yeah? Especially those nice, historically and mostly hysterically grown legacy systems. Yeah? They have usually horrible models. Yeah? Way too detailed. Yeah? No information hiding or whatsoever. Yeah? They just dump out whatever they have, and they sprawl through the application landscape like a cancer. Yeah? You want to visualize that. You want to make that explicitly visible. You can do that with the context map. And you can also use it for planning transformations. Yeah? You can say, okay, listen, that's the current state that we have, where we want to get over there, and those are the steps we want to take. Yeah, we change this, we change that, and so on and so forth. One thing that the literature often refers to is upstream and downstream. Yeah? If you look at, for instance, the definition of the customer-supplier pattern, which I'll come back to in a couple of minutes, it starts with when 2 teams are in an upstream-downstream relationship. Unfortunately, both books do not have a definition for upstream and downstream in them. Yeah? It was a little bit of guessing. However, the DDD reference now has one. In the end, upstream, downstream is about actions of the upstream team have a direct impact on the downstream team. Sounds familiar? What's that about? The influence flow. Yeah? How to understand that? I come from Nuremberg, and we have a river called the Pegnitz. It runs through Nuremberg. The next city, yeah, next to us, Fürth, is also on the Pegnitz. Nuremberg is on the upper side of the Pegnitz. So if I put a little ship, yeah, on the Pegnitz, it floats from Nuremberg to Fürth. So Nuremberg is upstream, Fürth is downstream. Now, let's say the people from Nuremberg go ahead and place a little boat on the Pegnitz with 10 cases of beer. The boat runs from Nuremberg to Fürth. The folks in Fürth say, as good Franconians, that's amazing, that's a great model, we're happy to consume that model. Yeah? Amazing, thank you. Yeah? Unfortunately, however, if you look at the soccer or football world, Nuremberg and Fürth like each other like Frankfurt and Offenbach. Yeah? Who's your main enemy of Carl Zeiss Jena? Erfurt, yeah? Yeah? I mean, you guys have the greatest jersey sponsor ever, yeah? Heaven shall burn, yeah? Amazing guys, yeah? And like effort, yeah? So let's say the Nuremberg fans, they go ahead and take a box of rubbish, of chemical dump, and they put it into the Pegnitz. The people in Fürth are helpless, yeah? The rubbish floats down to Fürth, yeah? And that's exactly, actions on the upstream have a direct impact on the downstream, yeah? So that's what it's about, the influence flow. Another thing that's not in the books is the patterns. In the books, they are listed one after each other. Open host service, customer supplier, conformist, and so on. However, in my eyes, there's a categorization for them. Yeah? This is something that comes from my opinion. That's not officially DDD literature. That's my personal opinion. I think you can categorize the patterns in upstream-centric, bilateral, and downstream-centric patterns. Yeah. In order to understand that, let's go through those patterns first. The open host service, yeah, offers a defined set of services that exposes functionality to other systems. In short, the open host service is something like a public API, which is designed for many consumers. That's not an interface for a one-to-one relationship. It's a public API. For instance, you as the Schufa, you will stay the Schufa throughout the whole talk. Yeah, I hope that's okay for you. You offer a open host service. You offer a web service which is accessible for all banks who sign on a contract with the Schufa, and everyone can integrate with it. If a team has idiosyncratic needs, yeah, the hint from the domain-driven design book is that you augment the protocol. Yeah, you build a one-off translator. Yeah. You don't want one team to swamp the API of the open host service. Yeah? You want that to stay simple and coherent for many users. Yeah? Public API. That's the main thing that you should have in mind for the open host service. Of course, this is upstream, always. Yeah? I mean, the team owning the public API, when they take some actions, those actions cascade to all of the consumers. Yeah? Always. Yeah? I mean, if those actions are legal or not, if they get fired for them or not, is uninteresting for that time being. Yeah? Basically, they are the owners of the API, and if they screw up, they run the risk of screwing all the other downstream consumers up as well. Let's switch to the downstream side. In my eyes, there are three patterns down there. Customer supplier can actually be seen as a bilateral pattern, but it's mainly driven by the customer side. Let's take a look at that. That means that the downstream teams, yeah, the introduction to customer supplier really is in the reference when two teams are in an upstream-downstream relationship, and then the definition goes on. Yeah, the needs of the customer come to be addressed in a variety of ways in terms of what they need. Yeah, they can be a meeting. Hey, dear Schufa, I need this, this, and that from you. And you say no. Yeah? But if you say, hey, okay, that's good. I can do that. I'll deliver that in 3 months, and so on. Yeah, we come in. We are in a customer-supplier relationship. Yeah. So sometimes the customer can be seen as a customer in a sense of an agile way. So they can make some demands of them. Of course, the upstream is still the king, but the downstream has some influence. Yeah? For instance, if you look at a mortgage loan application system, yeah, has someone ever financed a house in that room or an apartment or something like that? Yeah, that form that you filled out, was that customer friendly? No. Yeah, a bit. Yeah, but it was quite a bit to fill out. Yeah, you had to disclose a lot of your personal information. You had to disclose a lot of information about the property you want to finance, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so would the team of the, let's say, real estate loan sales funnel, from their motivation, which is sell a lot of loans, create such a big form? No. Yeah, they would want to go with a small form. hey, let's just have half a page. That's okay. We sell more credits if we have a smaller form. Yeah. But on the other hand, there is another bounded context called scoring, yeah, which estimates, hey, are you credit worthy? Can we give you a credit? And they make demands against that team. They say, hey, in order to really judge the credit worthiness of the applicants and the real estate, we need those informations. Hey, dear credit sales funnel, can you please put them into the form as well? And obviously, I would say in most banks, they are successful in doing so. That's a typical customer-supplier relationship here. Yeah? And this is the reason why I see it downstream-centric, because it's a lot about the customer, how the customer acts in this place. Yeah? On the other hand, we have the conformist. The conformist is something that I mentioned earlier. Yeah? You are the Schufa, you still are, and you answer in a model. Let's say that's your model, and you pass that to me. And I say, hey, that's a nice model. I keep on working with that. Yeah? I work with that model. That becomes my internal model as well. Yeah, that's my bounded context. Your bounded context is over there. That's my thing. That's a conformist. However, there can be various motivations for being a conformist. In my eyes, the literature is a little bit short about the motivations here. One motivation being mentioned in the literature is that integration is always expensive and translation causes a lot of trouble, and out of convenience, teams do that. True. However, teams can also be forced to conform to an external model. If you look at many commercial APIs, for instance, if you look at the terms of use, you will see that they say you may not alter, store, or enrich the model that we give you. Yeah? A good example for that. There was a German car maker whose boss ranted like crazy in the press about the arrogance about a certain US company that provided a maps and navigation service. Yeah? They ranted like crazy in the press. What happened? They went to that company and said, hey, we want to use your map navigation in our cars. And the US company answered, nice. Here's the documentation, and that's the price list. Those are the two links. And they went to them and said, yeah, well, but we need some more specific stuff from you. We need different SLAs. We need that feature. And the big internet company said, no. No. Those are the conditions, and they're there for everyone. They wanted their service to be a clean, open host service. The German car maker said, hey, we are the big German car maker. Yeah? We are your customer. And they approached the big internet company from the US with the attitude how they approach all of their other companies. Yeah? If you ever had to deal with them, you know that talking about finances with them is no fun. Yeah? So, and the big US company said, yeah, that's cute. We are the big internet company X. Yeah? The other said, but we would pay a lot of money for that. We have a lot of money. Well, I think we have a little bit more money than you. Yeah? Just in an ironic way. That's how probably the conversation went back and forth. So basically, the big internet company told the German car maker, hey, we are not going into a customer-supplier relationship for you folks. Either you are happy with being downstream and being a conformist, that's okay, then we come into business. If you're unhappy with that, goodbye, no business, we don't care. Yeah? They forced them into being a conformist. There was no business between them after that. Another motivation for being a conformist could be laziness or happiness. Hey, that external model here. That's exactly how I see the world. That's exactly how I want the world to be. This is my view on the world. I'll stick to that. You do that out of your own will or out of laziness. How do I translate the thing? I'll just take that. That's okay. So there's different motivations for that. Another thing that can happen, and let's say we still see that as the boundary between us, and you pass me that external model, yeah? But at the edge, yeah, you pass that over there, but at the brink of my boundary context, I translate it to something totally other, and I enrich it, and this small thing becomes a big backpack, and what so on. Yeah, that's the anti-corruption layer there. Yeah, you bring in an external model and you translate it to your own model, and please do that on a linguistic level. Yeah, you want to have a different ubiquitous language. Yeah, a different language. Yeah, a different meaning for things. Yeah, let's say you pass me a customer, but I don't work with customers. I work with address labels, and I translate the customer to an address label. Yeah? That's my view of the customer. It's you're a customer, but in my world, you're just an address label. Poor you, I'm sorry. Yeah? That's the anti-corruption layer. This all happens on the downstream side. Yeah? It's the way that the downstream team operates against the upstream. Now, there are 3 more patterns which are in the middle between them. Yeah? I call them bilateral patterns. The first one is the shared kernel. That's the model. Can you grab that for a second? We now share the model, yeah, on a physical level. If I pull over there, you fly over there. If you pull, I fly into the audience. Yeah. So every action has a reaction on the other side. You can. Yeah. This is a shared kernel on a physical level. So that can be in code, but it could also be the database schema. That's a very popular thing in monolithic applications, if you see that. Yeah? Like, the scoring component does a little bit, selects and joins over to the application form components tables. Yeah? It's just a small join, nothing big, nothing to worry about. It's a shared kernel. Now, the obvious idea in a microservices landscape would be that's a really stupid idea to do. Yeah, I wouldn't want to work with shared kernels in microservices. Yeah, no. In other applications, however, it depends. Yeah, I've seen teams working quite well with a shared kernel. It was a suboptimal solution, but it did the job. In other environments, I've seen a lot of fights and political escalations and whatnot around the shared kernel. It became toxic. Yeah? It depends how you see that. Another way that's quite interesting, especially if we look at the agile way in terms of the minimum viable product idea from the lean management, is the separate ways. Separate ways, first of all, says 2 bounded contexts have no connection with each other at all because integration is too expensive. Fair enough. Is that interesting? Sometimes. However, there is one interesting detail, and I call that the organizational solution. Yeah? You remember the reservations and the badges. Yeah? Excel file out, Word template over there. There is no hard integration between them, but on an organizational level, there is one. Yeah? And actually, I want to know about that. Or I want to explicitly design that. Is Rewe Online a product which is around in Erfurt, Jena, Weimar or something? Ilmenau, yeah. They implemented a very interesting way of separate ways. Logistics in e-commerce are a tough challenge. And what they've done is they said, now we don't build a logistics storage in each city that we launch. Yeah, they deal with food, so logistics is hard. What they did in a first step in new cities, they used existing supermarkets as their logistics storage, and the drivers went into the supermarket and just went shopping in there. Yeah? You may laugh, but that's a really good idea to scale out the business in the first run. The person who had that idea, I hope they got a huge bonus and they got promoted because that was a brilliant idea to do. And you can scale out and then grow with the business. Yeah, in certain cities where they now have stepped up to the market and it works, they are now ramping up dedicated centers for the logistics, but not in new ones. I'm sure in Ilmenau, there's a supermarket where they go and shop in. Yeah? Great idea. Yeah? The last one is the published language. In my eyes, there's a little bit of discussion around that if you read the literature in DDD. Especially Vaughan Vernon always puts open host service and published language next to each other in his diagrams. I'm personally not buying that at 100% because I think a well-documented interface is something that I expect from any open host service. Yeah? So there needs to be some Swagger document or XSD or WSDL or whatever you have, yeah, HATOS or and so on. I think the interesting part is who. Yeah? The published language is basically a description of a model, yeah? In a format that can be translated into and out to. Yeah? An XSD is something like that. A Swagger document is something like that. Yeah? For instance, yeah, some schema, JSON schema or whatever you have. Huh? Open API and so on. Yeah, a good example for that is, for instance, iCal or the VCard format. Yeah, something that we all work on a daily basis on our mobile phones together. Yeah, those are RFCs. And one thing that unifies them, that there is a committee that drives them. So there is a steering committee that sets the format. For instance, in the banking world, there is a format called Zugpferd, which is a published language for electronic bills. And there's a consortium that sets an industry standard. And that's the that's for me the interesting thing. If you have a consortium or a group of stakeholders who define that and who put that on another level, like this VCard, iCal, Zugpferd kind of stuff, yeah, then that's a published language and not just a interface description. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing. If we match that with Conways Law, we can easily see, in terms of the team communication, some require a tight coupling and integration between the teams. Others are more in terms of the loose coupling. If we work with microservices, we obviously want to be more or less down there. Yeah? Let me give you a quick example. Yeah. Those are a bunch of bounded contexts that have some relationships to each other. First thing that I look at, who is an upstream-downstream relationship with each other. For instance, scoring has no upstream-downstream relationship to the credit application. But yeah, let's start off with that. We see that credit agency offers an open host service. Yeah, you as the Schufa, you have your web service. Yeah, the customer is publishing a bunch of events. Also, the publishing of events can be seen as an open host service, obviously. Yeah? And then on the other hand, we see, hey, there is an anti-corruption layer. Yeah, it translates the customer to an address label, for instance. Scoring is a conformist on the model of the credit agency. For instance, the credit worthiness percentage of the credit agency equals the points that the scoring applies, yeah, to the calculation. Yeah? We identify that scoring and credit application have a shared kernel with each other, and that customer and credit application are in a customer-supplier relationship. The interesting thing in this context map lies over there. Take a look. The model of the credit agency propagates to scoring. That's a model flow. The conformist is a description for a model flow. Yeah? Scoring runs on the model of the credit agency. And now they share parts of their model with the credit application. So there's quite a risk that some elements from the credit agency's model end up down there. Yeah? If we change something over there, it might cascade over there. Yeah? Keep that in mind. Yeah? And this is, in my eyes, a really interesting thing. Now, another claim for microservice, and you can use the context map. Yeah? If you explicitly manage, yeah, the governance, you can create a decentralized governance model with the help of the patterns of the context map. Who is a customer to whom? Who just has to conform, yeah? And so on and so forth. Yeah? It's a very interesting thing. Another claim is microservice architectures should be evolvable. Yeah? The tactical design gives us a bunch of patterns, yeah, like aggregates, entities, and so on. I'll give you a brief overflight over there. The entity is something with an identity and a lifecycle. Yeah, that's the internals of a microservice that you can implement. Yeah? It has an identity and a lifecycle. The value object, on the other hand, It's just derives this identity from a bunch of values. Hey, that's an orange lanyard. Give me some orange lanyard. Color orange. Some orange. That presenter costs 50 euros. I don't care with which 50 euros you pay the presenter as long as you give me 50 euros. I don't accept $50. I don't accept 40 euros. Or I don't accept, let's say, 200 Namibian dollars or South African dollars or something like that. So the monetary value is a value object. The value object can implement is first of all immutable. It's very important. So if we look at the price and you go to an old school supermarket, like in our children days, there was a price tag on it. That's 50 euros. So let's say that Post-it is the price tag, big price tag. I put it on the presenter. The Post-it goes on sale. What would they do in the supermarket? They peel off the price tag and add a new one to it. Value object. It can have semantics. If you look at banks, they often calculate with 6-digit numbers after the comma. But they round up to 2 in external presentations to their customer according to common rounding rules. I can implement that behavior into the value objects. Did anyone find the mistake in the last 2 slides that I made?
Customers twice.
Now what's the customer? Is it an entity or a value object? It depends. It depends is always the right answer. Absolutely. On what? On what? On the bounded context. In one bounded context, the customer can be just a value. It's just some customer that I deal with. It's like in this context. There's. I don't mean that in a bad way. There's some person sitting there. I don't mind who exactly is sitting there. As long as it's a nice person, that's all good. In another context, for instance, at the door, they had the name list. Who are you? I specifically deal with a customer with a certain identity. The identity for that event that was sufficient was first name and last name. So if I was on the list with first name, last name, I make you stricter than you were. I was let in. That was good enough for an identity in that context over there. In another context is, for instance, if I look at your badge, your employee number. You are employee number whatever at Salesforce, for instance. Identity. So it depends on the context. Now, we can, of course, go ahead and build models with entities and value objects. However, they tend to grow. That's a problem. I have a couple of issues. First of all, this endless navigation through big object graphs is something that makes the code hard to understand, hard to read, hard to maintain. There's actually a metric called Law of Demeter. Who's heard of Law of Demeter, LOD, as a metric? It's a metric that gives you a couple of hints when you are allowed to call methods of a given object. There's 4 rules to that. For instance, auto, car, get motor, dot start would be usually a violation of the Law of Demeter. It's usually car.start, and the car should know how to start itself. The next thing is testing. I think the bigger the object graph, the more endless the navigation possibilities are, the harder the code becomes to test. We end up with a lot of mocks or deep mocks. Hey, we need a mock. We need to put another mock in there, and into that mock, another 2 mocks. No one wants to write such unit tests. And if no one wants to write such unit tests, what happens? You don't write unit tests. That's a problem. And with that goes hand in hand cascading in errors. I open that door, and through the air pressure, the window over there falls out and kills someone down the street. And everyone wonders, how could that happen? We've witnessed that I think everybody in the room has witnessed such situations with software. Someone changed something over there and suddenly at a totally different place, boom, an error popped up, of course in production. Yeah? And everybody was like, whoa, interesting. Yeah? And the last thing is consistency. With those big object graphs, yeah, you usually have big transactional boundaries. You have huge transactions. Any change that you do affects possibly that transaction. Yeah? That's fragile. DDD comes with a pattern for that, the aggregate. Yeah? The aggregates group entities and value objects together. Yeah? And they define a so-called root entity. Yeah? And this root entity has a couple of rules. The first rule is it's the king of the life cycle of the aggregate. It controls the life cycle of the aggregate. In this case, that's easy. 2 value objects, an entity, easy going. Over there, the root entity overrides that life cycle of that entity. The next thing is the root entity is the only allowed place that is allowed for references from the outside. So from the outside, other components may only reference the root entity. Yeah? You limit the points of coupling. I always say coupling starts with the provider. Yeah? If you provide an open door to your house, you open a lot of coupling points in your house. You shouldn't be surprised if someone is sleeping in your bed. And you question, whoa, how did they get in there? Yeah? And so on. There's a couple of more rules, like they should be a consistency boundary and they should also be a transactional boundary. So one aggregate is one transaction. Yeah? We could go on for that for ages. In my, we're selling a couple of domain-driven design trainings, and I think there is at least half a day where we're just talking about that. So if you're interested, check out our trainings. Sales pitch. I said I'll talk about connaissance. I'll do that right now. Connaissance means, in software engineering, 2 components are connaissant if a change in one would require the other to be modified in order to maintain the overall correctness of the system. And this is exactly what I want to achieve with the aggregate. Yeah, I want my aggregates not to be connaissant. Yeah, I want to make them in a way that if I change one, it doesn't cascade to the others. And we can embed that internally into a hexagonal architecture. It's called hexagonal or onion architecture. I'm not a fan of hexagonal architecture as a term because it's not about hexagons. I like the reference to the onions a little bit. Yeah, you have a core, yeah, the application core, which is the core of your onion, and then you have other rings around it. This is nothing DDD specific. That's an architecture style. Herberto Grasser wrote a really great book, and I was heavily inspired by his graphical notation, so why I have many similarities to that on a graphical level. Props to Herberto on that side. And it basically says, hey, we have a user interface part, an infrastructure part, and an application core part. Around that, I can implement various adapters. Yeah, let's say Herberto calls them the primary and driving adapters. Those are basically a UI, RESTful interface, CLI endpoint, or something like that. And on the other hand, we have driven adapters, a core banking adapter, an ORM adapter, a message bus adapter. The call flow is always like that. Yeah, we hit a button there, we do some database queries and so on, do some processing in there, and respond with a result over there. We also want to have inversion of control. Dependencies always lean, oops, where's my, hello? Always lean to the inside from that side and from the other side as well. So you obviously work with service provider interfaces and stuff like that. And in there is the application core. This is where your aggregates reside. And if we look at the idea of the connaissance, we should make sure that internally our microservices are cut into components, and the aggregates are a good idea for the granularity of such components. So they should share a minimal shared core. The onion architecture also talks about a shared kernel, but that's inside a context. There can also be a shared kernel, which I've talked before, outside. Yeah, and I think if we make that, yeah, we could easily extract one of those components as a new microservice. We could start with a coarse-grained structure up front, and then refactor to a finer grained structure as we need it. Yeah? That's the evolvability kind of thing. That's interesting in my eyes here. Yeah? But the hexagonal architecture is not your only option, and you've seen that slide before. Yeah? Please make a wise decision. That is complex stuff. That's suitable for complex problem domains, for complex bounded contexts. Yeah? The capturing of the sales form, yeah, is super easy. Yeah? Also mind integration styles for microservices here. Yeah? Think about orchestration versus choreography. Yeah? Orchestration means, hey, I'm calling you the Schufa. Choreography means, hey, someone submits an event and I am reacting on that. Yeah? And those events, they are something that the domain-driven design community is nowadays talking a lot about. Yeah? It's a lot about event-driven microservices. And you can also model your information about an activity in a series of discrete events. Remember my logistics example from the first talk. Yeah? Basically, the domain in that package tracking thing was nothing but a series of discrete events. Yeah? Yeah? And they should be modeled that they are always, yeah, something that happened in the past. And with event storming, we have a workshop model to identify those events. That's something from the cultural thing that's super easy. Yeah? You explore a domain starting from those events. Yeah? You invite business stakeholders. You kick out all tables out of a room, go on a long wall, and start putting post-its on them. Yeah? So basically, you have a post-it for commands. They act on aggregates. Those return events and so on. I don't want to go into too much detail. Just as a hint, if events and microservices are interesting for you and you want to work with your business stakeholders, take a look at event storming. There's a great book on LeanPub from Alberto Brandolini, who has invented that. Absolutely amazing book, and I highly recommend that. Yeah? And another thing that often happens in event-driven microservices is the first technology that I hear within 1 hour, we need Kafka. No. Yeah? If you combine that idea, the idea of RESTful HTTP with events, you can create HTTP feeds. Yeah? For instance, in this case, contract offers, yeah? And the credit decision. The credit decision publishes application-approved events as an atom feed. You remember the RSS world? Yeah? You can use that. Yeah? You publish an HTTP feed. And the contract offers polls against that feed. That's often good enough. As I said, I like good enough a lot. Yeah? HTTP gives us many good stuff. Caching headers, pagination, last modified headers, TLS security, basic authentication. We get a lot of that stuff for free without an additional infrastructure. Yeah? And if you have moderate messaging requirements, you may look into that. That's a good idea. However, one thing that we have to do, yeah, when we offer feeds, what do we have to do? We need to persist our events. Yeah? We need to store them somewhere. Yeah? And this is where one thing, and this is highly optional, comes into place. Event sourcing can be an architectural pattern that can help you in those things. Please don't go ahead and say, ha, we built our whole application with event sourcing. Yeah? We toss away the relational database and we just store our events and store them in a database. That's a specialized solution for special problems. Yeah? I could talk 2 hours about event sourcing, but it's about 9 o'clock in the evening, so just an idea. And based on that, yeah, you can also derive a couple of views from those events. Read models, so to say. And this is where command query responsibility segregation comes into place. Just an idea, just a little teaser. There's something that can be of interest, but that's for me a special solution to special problems. Both of them are discussed in the DDD community at lengths currently. Yeah? Even Vaughan Vernon mentioned them in the Red Book. Now, another thing that often comes into place, into discussions is, hey, I have a monolith and I want to have microservices now. Can DDD help me with that? I think yes. The starting point is often the monolith. Yeah, it looks like that. Yeah, not so nice, a little bit rundown and so on. If we look a little bit closer into monoliths that create problems, that have problems, the monolith is not a bad thing, but this monolith is a bad thing. Yeah? Totally unstructured, a rundown thing of IT. Yeah? I think you have a couple of approaches. You can approach it from a top-down. Yeah? The context map helps you. Yeah? Identify vertical slices in the monolith. Some of them have them. And try to draw a context map. How do they relate to each other? Where do they have shared kernels? Yeah? Do I eventually have various teams working on subparts of that? How do they interact with each other? If you don't have that, yeah, you may want to start up from the bottom up and refactor the monolith internally by introducing aggregates. Yeah? Ramping down the transactional boundaries. Yeah? Creating clear consistency boundaries. Yeah? And if you do that, yeah, in an iterative manner, some bounded contexts might appear that become microservice candidates. Yeah? But never, ever, please, perform a big bang migration. Yeah? It's going to fail. Yeah? Work in small steps, and each step should really deliver a substantial improvement. If we sum that up, I really think that microservices love domain-driven design quite a bit. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
I have two of those.
Go ahead.
The first one is the aggregate. So it's, as far as I understood, a few aggregates can exist inside one microservice, right?
Sorry. Yes, but just a minute. That's true. Yes, you can have various aggregates in there. I would say the general rule of thumb, a microservice should be approximately half of the size of a bounded context. But what I always say to a couple of my customers is a microservice should have can be as small as an aggregate. If you have a really specialized aggregate, that can be a microservice. But it shouldn't be bigger than a bounded context. Yeah? It should be something in between of that. That's the usual it depends kind of thing. Yeah?
So the second question is, I like the idea of this step-by-step.
Yeah.
So it's just and do you know about this self-contained systems?
Yeah, sure. innoQ invented them.
The role in this context, is it a good idea?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Basically, we from innoQ, we were the ones who published the paper on self-contained systems. The bounded context is a perfect fit for a self-contained system. Yeah? And the aggregates in there, one of the things that the self-contained system proclaims is that on the business layer level, yeah, you may extract several smaller microservices out of that. That can be your aggregates. It fits perfectly together. Basically, that presentation has self-contained systems in the back of its head.
Yeah, I like
yeah,
it, yeah.
Absolutely. It fits perfectly. Yes?
Who takes care of the big picture in microservice architectures?
That's a good question as well. What I usually tell my customers, think about macro and micro architecture. Yeah? You need some sort of an architecture group between microservices because in the end they need to work together. I think you guys from Salesforce who are probably running a microservice architecture at a pretty large scale. Yeah, they are, I guess. I've never worked for you, I've never seen any of your internals and whatever, but I guess that you have a couple of rules for your microservices, how they work together. Yeah? And I think every solid microservices architecture has some of those rules. Yeah? And that's the macro architecture part. And you need a little bit of board, but it should be small, but with a mandatory long-term focus. The micro architecture is the freedom for the teams then. And I think that works quite well. And one thing that I do in terms of the macro architecture, that I say, hey, that's a CRUD bounded context, that's a complex logic bounded context, that's a query driven bounded context. You remember the slide where I had that the hexagonal architecture isn't your only choice? I categorize my bounded context, giving the teams an indication how they should implement them. Because I think the rule that everything needs to be done with the internal building blocks and the hexagonal architecture is wrong. It leads to a total overkill. All right, 2 last words from my side. Remember my book, and we also provide consulting and trainings around domain-driven design. For instance, we have a 3-day training course. Is someone interested or doing the ISAQB architecture certification eventually? Yeah, we have credit points on that, and the training course is 50% theory and 50% practice. I bring an 8-page complex case study, and we do DDD on a really complex thing. So if you're interested in that, check it out at our homepage. And if you're interested in consulting, you can hit us up at any time. Enough for the advertising. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.